Hello, everyone. My name is Karin Sumis, and I'm the senior curator at the Gardiner Museum. Welcome to our annual lecture series. You will notice that your mics and videos are often muted and that the chat option has been disabled. There will be a Q&A following today's lecture, so we invite you to send us your questions through the Q&A function at any point throughout the talk. Also, please note that the closed captioning provided is automated and that any information that appears is not reviewed for accuracy. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that Toronto is located on the treaty lands and ancestral territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Petun, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. The community we work in is the home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to learn and live on this territory. It is a pleasure to be here with you virtually for the annual Anne Walker Bell Lecture, which is supported by the Bell family. About 20 years ago, Robert Murray Bell and Anne Walker Bell donated a significant collection of Chinese blue and white porcelain to the Gardiner Museum, introducing this field as a significant area of collecting for the museum. And I'm here showing you some images of the collection on view in our permanent galleries. Our Asian porcelain holdings have since then expanded with other important gifts. We are delighted to welcome our speaker for today, Dr. Chih-En Chen. Dr. Chih-En Chen is a lecturer of East Asian art history at the University of Toronto. He was awarded a PhD from the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London. His research interest lies primarily in Chinese ceramics and material culture, artisanal knowledge, art in a Eurasian context, gendered spaces and objects, Chan Buddhism, and the relationship between art and medicine. His doctoral thesis was entitled The Origin, Development, and Classification of Trompe Porcelain in High Qing China. And it explored Trompe works of art in the long 18th century in Imperial China. So today he will be presenting an aspect of this research with us in a lecture entitled Playthings of Femininity, the Origin and Development of High Qing Trompe Porcelain. So I would now like to welcome Dr. Chih-En Chen.
Thank you so much, Karin, for such a great and kind introduction. I will share my screen first. Sorry, bear with me. Okay. Thank you again. And firstly, I also like to express my gratitude to the Gardiner Museum for inviting me to share my research to all of you. I also want to thank Social Science and Humanity Research Council of Canada to fund my PhD research throughout the years. Without this doctoral fellowship, all of this would not have been possible. In completing this research I'm presenting today, I own tremendous debt in many kinds to many scholars and friends in London, UK, and around the world, particularly scholars from the National Paris Museum in Taipei, Paris Museum in Beijing, and the Museum Guimet à Paris, and the Bauer Foundation in Switzerland, the British Museum, the V&A, and of course, the Royal Ontario Museum here in Toronto. And many of you who step in and help me are in the audience today. I thank you for coming, and I want you to know that I feel extremely grateful. The title for my talk today is Playthings of Femininity, the Origin, the Development of High Qing Trompe Porcelain. This title is derived from my PhD thesis that focused on this unique category of Qing Trompe porcelain with deceptive surface. And that I will deliver today is only a small section of its original thesis. So if you are interested in the topic, I do encourage you to read the thesis once it's become available. So first thing first, what is trompe l'oeil, or the French pronunciation, the trompe l'oeil? I have this simple and straightforward definition from Oxford Reference. Visual illusion in art, especially as used to trick the eye in perceiving a painted detail, as a three-dimensional object. The term is French and it means literally deceive the eye. So the use of this term was originated in 18th century and mostly to describe painting that deceive the viewer of its dimensionality. Also, for those who are not familiar with the Chinese history, the High Qing period refer to the long 18th century in China, which is circa 1683 to 1839. Now I would like to define what do I mean by Trompe piercing, which is stated in the title of today's talk. So here is an example from the collection of National Palace Museum in Taipei. It's a box of 18 Manchu archer's ring. They are made in enamel piercing, but look like in a variety of materials on their surface, including pudding stone, wood, ivory, malachite, turquoise stone, marble, and so on. So those you can see on the image here. This piercing archer's ring using one material, namely the piercing, to imitate the others, representing an uncanny verisimilitude to fool the eye of the viewers in front of them, are defined as Trompe piercing in this research. So compared to Trompe painting, the Qing Trompe piercing deceived the viewer by its materiality instead of dimensionality. And on this slide to the left is an example of 18th century archer's ring made of the real wood. And to your right, you see a piercing imitation version dated to the Qianlong ring period with its iron red inscription to its interior. Let me try this laser pointer. So yeah, it's right here, the inscription to the interior. Also, in this study, not only having the deceptive surface is important to get to be defined as Trompe piercing, but also in order to really deceive the viewers, the scale of the piercing has to be faithful to its real world counterpart. Therefore, the example shown on the slide, a miniature piercing dog here, and the vase with 3 miniature boys, and a vase with 3 realistic goats, but again, in a miniature scale, are not defined as Trompe piercing in this research. Now here is to show you that there are numerous different materials could be used as a reference model for making Trompe piercing during the High Qing era. We can have piercing imitating natural wood, carved silver lacquer, onyx bronze, lacquer wood, gilt bronze, natural conch shell, natural fruit and nuts, etc. And here are some examples from the auction preview, and one of my favorite is a very special piece on the top left here, this one. Of the slide, it's a sky blue glaze water basin with Trompe wooden stand attached to the ring. The piece was offered at Wooden Wallace back in 2018, and it's ended up become a very essential piece in my research and my PhD thesis. And from this, I would like to emphasize that Qing Trompe piercing in the present scholarship has been praised as rare, important, delicate, difficult to fire, imperial commission, and therefore assumed as a product standing for the highest technical success in the 18th century China. And this category has been claimed to be closely connected to the Qing Imperial King Superintendent. His name is Tang Ying, and also connected to the connoisseurship of the Qing Emperor, particularly the Qianlong Emperor in High Qing period. As such, Trompe piercing has often fetched incredibly high price in the art market, and that alone is mostly because it's attributed to the Superintendent Tang Ying. However, in today's talk, I aim to open up a whole new chapter for you to understand the very existence of the Qing Trompe piercing that differs dramatically from the conventional wisdom which I just mentioned above. Before I get into the leading argument in today's talk, the first half of the talk, I would like to quickly unfold some fundamental research methodology in this research, which will function as a bedrock for you to understand the key finding in this project. So firstly, this is a nomenclature study of Qing Trompe piercing in the sense of Michael Bazander's The Period I. In other words, through the study of the name given to the Qing Trompe piercing in High Qing period, this research identified Qing Trompe piercing in the primary historical text and the museum's collection. And all of these lead to the final step, recontextualization. Recontextualizing Qing Trompe piercing, that is to bring the Qing Trompe piercing back to their original Qing court context. And that is where those Qing Trompe piercing display and store in which palace, inside or outside of the Forbidden City in Beijing. And from there to discuss the connoisseurship and functionality of this category. And I will explain why to discuss the Qing Trompe, the Qing court art in its original context is so important in later today. So to conduct a nomenclature study, the study of names of object for the Qing Trompe piercing, that is to, so our first and the most important step is to consider where was Qing Trompe piercing documented in the historical text. And as many of you know, most of the Qing Imperial Commission object works of art had been documented in the Qing Imperial Workshop Record, or 照办处各做成活记清档, in short as 活记档. The Qing Imperial Workshop Record is valuable in terms of study of court art made in the Qing dynasty because it is faithful description of what happened in the Qing Imperial Workshop, situated in the Forbidden City. And it was recorded in the format pretty much like a dialogue between emperor and the person in charge of the art making. So there were a lot which could be useful for us to understand the emperor's connoisseurship and his knowledge on a certain genre of works of art. So I decided to start with this primary textual source. However, after spending tremendous time reading closely the record running nearly 200 years, it was only to prove that almost none of the Qing Trompe piercing was recorded in the Qing Imperial Workshop Record. So I actually did the research in my first year of PhD at SOAS University of London, and it was quite frustrating when I realized there was nothing that I look for. So I would say the most important discovery in the very beginning of my PhD project was that I found there was nothing that I look for. However, the absence of the Qing Trompe piercing in the Qing Imperial Workshop Record did bring my research on a totally different path. Because even there was nothing, it may suggest a few important things. So firstly, the Trompe piercing might not be Imperial Commission, which were not produced in the Qing Imperial Workshop or Jingdezhen direct order from the emperor. And secondly, they were indeed recorded. However, it is linguistically unrecognizable for modern day research. In other words, the name of the Trompe at the time might differ from what we have expected. Number three, there are thousands of Trompe piercings survived to the present day in the museum around the world and they show up from time to time in the art market as well. If they were not documented in the Qing Imperial Workshop Record, they must have been documented somewhere else, but the question is where? Accordingly, in order to identify Qing Trompe piercing in primary textual source, I developed a series of text mining principles and a routine, which I address as nomenclature formula. and the nomenclature keywords, which I don't have time to elaborate in detail in today's talk, but here on the slide is a synopsis of this methodology. I mainly use this text mining methodology to find Qing Trompe person in the Qing Imperial Tribute Record and the Qing Imperial Display Record. From the nomenclature study of Qing Trompe person, I was able to identify over 6,000 pieces of Qing Trompe person, which were recorded in the Qing Imperial Tribute Record. And based on the Trompe person that I successfully identified from historical text, I turned it into a statistic diagram shown on the screen. And this is based on the 6,277 pieces of Qing Trompe person identified from the Qing Tribute Record, and there are a few things worth noticing. But firstly, this is the first time in the historiography that we have a bird's eye view of the Qing person production building on statistic analysis. Secondly, as person tribute was fired without the emperor's knowledge, most of Qing Trompe person were not imperial commission. Number three, Qing Trompe person were fired primarily under the Qianlong Ring period, and this is consistent with what the present scholarship has argued, but now we do have primary textual source to support this point. Number four, the superintendent Tang Ying, who has been claimed to closely related to the manufacture of the Qing Trompe person, in fact, did not play a critical role in its production. Number five, the production of Qing Trompe person was clearly impacted by the emperor's preference. For example, in the 35th year of the Qianlong Ring period, the emperor gave a direct order to fire a wool vase. Here, this one, a wool vase with an imitation wood stand. So you'll see on the screen. And after that, the production of the Qing Trompe person soared very quickly. On the contrary, in the 45th year of the Qianlong Ring period, 40 years of the Qianlong Ring period, the emperor rejected a pair of imitation bronze huvas, here, this pair. And after that, the production of the Qing Trompe person dropped quickly, and it took a while to fetch another high point of production. Now I would like to briefly explain the design and aesthetic and development of Qing Trompe person, and I choose imitation wood for you as the first example. So wood was one of the most popular reference model. So wood was one of the most popular reference models for firing Qing Trompe person, and it comes with various shape and design. However, in the present scholarship, they are mostly referred just as a faux bras, the wood imitation, without further considering the fact that the painted wood grain are in fact looks very, very different. So one of the earliest example of imitation wood Qing Trompe person was recorded in the 6th year of the Yongzheng Ring period. It was a water basin with a deceptive surface described as 豆瓣楠木. A piece corresponding to this description can be identified in the collection of the National Paris Museum in Taipei. The painted wood grain on this water basin was delicately executed, and is also very realistic when we compare to the natural grain of 豆瓣楠木, which shows in the center here on the side. And the 豆瓣楠木 imitation wood bucket was also documented, and we can find the corresponding piece from the formal Meiying Tang collection. This is also an imitation wood bucket, and it was dated to the Yongzheng Ring period. However, this water bucket from the Royal Ontario Museum collection in Canada here in Toronto clearly had a very different reference model compared to the previous example. So the wood grain is very similar to the Chinese Bainan Mu, which was popular as material for making daily use utensil in the 18th century China. And here comes with another example. Also, the former main Tong collection from Switzerland is a porcelain water basin with a painted surface imitating Huanghuali wood. Here in the middle is a natural example. So compared to a natural wood grain Huanghuali, the imitation is highly realistic. Also, there are many imitations with Tibetan bowl and cup survived to the present day from the Yongzheng and the early Qianlong Reign period, and they come with a variety of wood grain and colors. If we look into the primary texture source, we do see Tibetan wood bowl and cup were in fact made of various different species of wood. This once again suggests that the Qing Trompe porcelain were made after the reference model from the real world. However, when it comes to the late Qianlong Reign period and after, the imitation of wood grains start to become imaginary. They are often not made into highly realistic rendition, which make most of the Qing trompe-l'oeil porcelain at the time become not so much deceptive. This imagined wood grain also became a habitat in the firing of Chinese export porcelain and was extremely popular. Here are some examples shown on the slide. This trajectory of the manufacture of Qing Trompe porcelain from realistic, deceptive, to the later imagined rendition was not only applied to the wood grain, but also on the other reference model, such as bronze, marble, pudding stone, porcelain, silver lacquer, and many others. So in terms of imitation bronze in imaginary design, let's take a look at an interesting example from the Paris Museum in Beijing. Excuse me. It's a late Qing imitation bronze gui ship vessel. It's glazed with bronze-like greenish blue glaze right here. And to the base, carved with inscription that we usually find on orchid bronze from the Shang to the Zhou dynasty. It seems to be realistic until we find that the original reference model for this gui vessel survived to the present day, made in bronze, and has exactly the same inscription, actually look very different from this Trompe porcelain version. So this gui vessel is currently in the Capital Museum collection in Beijing, and the same vessel was also illustrated in the Qing Dynasty orchid bronze catalog, Xi-Qing Gujian. Let's take a look, a closer look. So here is the porcelain rendition, Trompe porcelain version, and here is the original gui vessel as a reference model, and this one is the one illustrated on Xi-Qing Gujian, the orchid bronze catalog. So firstly, the shape of the vessel seems to be match each other, but the original orchid bronze has 4 handles instead of just 2. Also, the inscription on the original piece was carved to the interior. It's in the interior instead of the exterior base. So the Trompe porcelain one is carved right here. So that's why there's a mirror when they do the inscription, so you can see the inscription underneath. And all this suggests that the potter might not have access to the original gui vessel in the Jingdezhen kiln. So they actually copied directly from the illustrated catalog, in which we only see 2 handles. From the illustrated catalog, because the depiction perspective, and the potter thought the gui only has 2 handles, but in fact, the gui vessel has 4 handles. Also, because of the illustration, the inscription does not get to mark as something carved to its interior. Therefore, the potter choose to carve it to the exterior base, mostly because it's much easier to be done and during the firing process. In this case, the potter created a vessel which is supposed to be trompe but does not exist in the real world. Okay, now we should move on to the second half of today's talk, recontextualization. I would like to bring you on a journey in which we will bring Qing trompe piercing back to its original Qing court context in the 18th century China. So first, why is this important to recontextualize Qing court art? So it's been argued by many previous scholars that the space in the Forbidden City was hierarchical, not only for the people living within, but also for the collection, display, and storage. For example, Yang Cai and Hua Fa Lang, these two catalogs of Qing the Qing court art has been proved to have emperor's direct involvement in the design, and emperor showed his preference on the aesthetic of these two genres. Yang Cai and Hua Fa Lang have been consistent display and stored in Qian Gong and Yangxing Dian, the two palaces that the emperor himself spent most of his time during the reign. So how about Qing trompe piercing? Where were they displayed and stored? In order to answer this question, three primary sources will be consulted. The first one is called the location index in the National Palace Museum and Palace Museum Internal Archive. This includes the yellow label, the station number of 1000 character classic, the red and green label, and the modern institutionalized station number. And the second one is the Qing Imperial Display Record, and the last one is the Qing Imperial Tribute Record. So when we brought the Qing trompe piercing back to its original palace, we found a very interesting phenomenon. Most of the Qing trompe piercing were stored outside of the Forbidden City instead of in the Forbidden City, which is apparently opposite to the distribution of Yang Cai and Hua Fa Lang, which we just mentioned in previous slide. On the slide is the diagram showing the distribution of Qing trompe piercing kept in the National Palace Museum in Taipei. As we can see, around 700 pieces of Qing trompe piercing currently kept in the museum. Only about 70 pieces used to be displayed in the Forbidden City back in the High Qing period. So now let's explore further on the location of those Qing trompe piercing in the Forbidden City. Here is a map of Forbidden City in Beijing, and now we're gonna slowly put Qing trompe piercing back to where it was displayed originally. So firstly, we have this imitation wood basin that we have discussed earlier in Jingleng Gong, and an imitation cinnabar locker box with imitation cross-on panel inlay in Qishun Tang. And then this is imitation turquoise stone court piece in Youshou Gong. And this imitation archaic bronze gui vessel we just mentioned in Shoukang Gong, as well as many artists, and they are all in the Qing Imperial Women's space. And we also have this amazingly molded sky blue glaze water basin with imitation bronze stand that was displayed in Chonghua Gong. And the renowned piercing dock in Nanshan. And the set of piercing album in Dunben Dian. And all of these spaces mainly used by the Qing prince. And finally, many Qing trompe piercing were displayed in Ningshou Gong, which was the Qing emperor's retirement residence. So now we have made the Qing trompe piercing back to its original location. And one thing we noticed is that none of the Qing trompe piercing were displayed together with Yang Cai and Hua Fa Lang in Qian Gong and Yangxing Dian. So how do we characterize the distribution of Qing Trompe person in the Forbidden City? And do these spaces share anything in common? So in order to answer this, now let's first take a look at the concept called feminine space. So if we gender the space in the Forbidden City into masculine and feminine in terms of sovereignty and the characteristic of exerting supreme authority instead of the gender of space as owner in the sense of biological sex, the palace that represent the righteousness of the great Qing Empire empires ruling such as Chen-Qing-Gong and Yangqing-Dian could be regarded as masculine space. And this idea of a symbolic dichotomy of gender space has been visited in the previous scholarship, particularly within the framework of sociology. For example, cities and suburbs have been compared to masculinity and femininity by Barry Strauss. I quote, "No wonder that male and female symbolism should distinguish city and suburb with such decisiveness, not only to the gender of the daytime population, the suburbia own its essential femininity, but also to the domesticity which is its very raison d'etre, and to its corresponding alienation from the serious work which has always taken place within the masculine province of the city. This suburb, in this sense, conform to the Freudian conception of femininity, passive, intellectually void, instinctually distractive," end quote. So the environmental psychologist Susan Sergen also argued that, I quote, "Urban life and men tend to be thought of as more aggressive, assertive, definer of important world event, intellectual, powerful, active, and sometimes dangerous. Women and suburb share domesticity, repose, closeness to nature, lack of seriousness, mildness, and safety. Figuratively, women and suburb tend to be more conservative about political and moral issues and norms," end quote. Therefore, the Chen-Qing-Gong as imperial power center of the Great Qing Empire and the definer of the Qing imperial event of importance where the serious work taken place can naturally associate with masculinity and masculine space. As such, opposite to the masculine space, the space holding Qing Trompe person are away from the sovereignty center of Great Qing Empire in which no serious work was taken place, so the space could be regarded as the feminine space. Now let's take a look at this map again. If we consider this place from the perspective of the Qing Emperor, they are all visited when he was off duty and not acting as the ruler of the empire. He could be a son, a husband, and a retired man. In other words, those spaces are not built for serious work, so to speak. Therefore, all of the Qing Trompe person were stored in the feminine space within Forbidden City, and this is very different from Yangcai and Huafalang, which were mostly stored in the masculine space. Now we have the fact that the Qing Trompe person was displayed and stored in a feminine space within the Forbidden City. And the next question would be should be asked is why? So I propose the term trivialization to describe the fact that the Qing Trompe person had been restricted within the feminine space, and being exotic had been the reason that this journal was trivialized and considered not serious. One clear evidence showing that the Qing Trompe person was trivialized by the emperor is a commission of making bespoke wooden box. as it has been proved that those artwork treasured and valued by the Qing Emperor would have been sent to the Qing Imperial Workshop to make a wooden box, and with inscription on top. This is the one you see here, inscription on top with a nomenclature. Especially for storing the piece as it shown on the slide for Yang Cai and Hua Fa Lang. However, this just never happened to the Qing Trompe person. Also, in the High Qing period, many Qing Trompe persons are characterized with exotic surface. The firing technique at the time was exquisite enough for the patron and the porters to use the clay ingress to imitate many foreign material. Therefore, being trompe-l'oeil had gradually become closely associated with exoticism. For example, on the slide, you can see two Yongzheng period imitation wood basin. The middle one is from the Bauer collection, and the one to the right sold at Christie's in 1999. While the design with two different wood slabs lying alternately is clearly non-Chinese. However, it resembles the European specimen with the pit bucket. This is one. Another example here is the moon flask from the V&A collection in UK, decorated with the patterns of Herefordshire pudding stone, which is of course non-Chinese. And we also see imitation Wedgwood porcelain, such as this pair of song vase in the collection of the Fitzwilliam Museum in UK, and in the collection of the Palace Museum in Beijing. There are some Wedgwood decorated bells survived from the Qing court's collection, which support the Qing imperial contact with the Wedgwood porcelain. Moreover, natural seashell was also one of the most popular reference models for Qing Trompe porcelain. The example here on the slide is a porcelain imitation bullmouth shell. And the bullmouth shell was a common colonial commodity in the European market for decoration and could only be sourced from offshore of southern Africa coast. Therefore, this makes the piece as a Trompe porcelain with exotic surface. And we also see design of crack and fruit plate in High Qing China, like this one currently in the Paris Museum collection in Beijing, and all of the auspicious fruit and nuts, as well as the crab itself, were all fire attached to the plate. And this kind of design has never been seen in China before. And the idea was possibly derived from the renowned French policy ware. Moreover, this exotic does not have to be something exclusively European. Here we see a selection of fire striker box from the collection of the National Palace Museum in Taipei in the form of Japanese inlay. Yet they were molded and glazed with the surface similar to the French chagrin etui and Vesta cast. Those exotic design that we have seen, no matter Europeanity or Japanesity, can be compared to the parallel aesthetic in the West, known as chinoiserie. In David Porter's path-breaking book, The Chinese Text in 18th Century England, in which he unfolded this long-standing connection between chinoiserie and female consumption, he argued in the first chapter, which is led by Charles Lamb's classic essay, Old China. I quote, "So how, in particular, do Chinese things matter?" Lamb's essay opened up a number of rich veins through which the question might be usefully explored and a promising alternative to outmoded paradigm pursuit. The memorable confession that began the essay, "I have an almost feminine partiality for old China," remind us that the meaning and appeal of Chinese-style porcelain had long been understood in gender terms. How did this slightly embarrassing partiality first come to be coded as distinctly feminine? And how did its meaning function and evolve over the course of a century, noted for its obsessive concern with reshaping the unsettling contour of female desire? The feminine and the Chinese, I hope to show, were reciprocally constituting categories throughout much of the century, collectively evoking oddness and extravagance while dialectically combining and tantalizing allure of superficial beauty with the troubling specter of transgressive monstrosity, end quote. He continued to lay out the argument from the perspective of the established social stratification and segregation of art in terms of gender. I quote, "A partiality for old China on the part of the men require an apology, not only for the inversion of gender norm that is implied, but also for its defiance of established hierarchies among the arts. When I go to see any great house," Lamb continued, "I inquire for the china closet, and next for the picture gallery." The narrator defends his indefensible preference on the ground of idiosyncratic personal taste, end quote. As such, the feminine partiality, a test for the unusual with a negative connotation, has been closely associated with chinoiserie style and the Trompe person characterized as something exotic, also possess a similar feminine partiality. And this explains layer distribution in the feminine space. The Trompe person label had been trivialized as playthings, which was opposite to the other serious work found in the masculine space and public space in High Qing China. So finally, I would like to share this interesting piece to conclude the talk today. There is a big category of porcelain which was popular in 18th and 19th century China and also the Japan, which is a trompe fruit or a vegetable hinge box. The hinge is right here. And they are modeled and decorated with sexual and erotic scene inside the box. This category is featured with preference not only on its trompe surface, but also the surprisingly hidden sexual scene inside the box. However, because this is a non-imperial work, so we do not have data showing its original display location, but I believe it could be arranged in the feminine space as well. And it could either function as a sex toy or have educational purpose per se. So in any case, this requires further exploration. And if I do find an answer in the near future, I will make sure to let you know. And my talk should end here. And thank you so much for your attention. Any question is welcome, and I'm looking forward to it. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chen, for this wonderful lecture and for taking us through this fascinating aspect of Chinese ceramics. I personally learned a lot from your talk, and we have a few questions that came in during the talk. The first one came at the very beginning of your lecture when you were talking about Archer's ring, and the person is asking what these rings were used for.
Okay, yeah, very good question. Sorry, I didn't explain that in detail. So the archer's ring is a specific design ornament for, at first it's functional, it's for the archer, the Manchu archer, to easily pull out the bow for the arrow. So it's actually put on your thumb, and the string will just stuck on the ring, and then will make you for easier to pull the bow, and it's and also much powerful and strong, and with strong strengths. And later in the late Qing, because it's just become not only as a function object, but also become an object more like a decorative purpose. So it's also stand for a person's status, like imperial member might have or ultra string, which is abundantly decorated in a very difficult technique, like a firing or enamel, etc.
Thank you very much. So the following question pertains to the representation of wood, and you showed us many beautiful examples of ceramics imitating wood. And is the reason why this type of reference was so popular because of the scarcity of wood, or as a way because it allowed for the demonstration of the artist's crafts?
Yeah, this is a very, very good question. So in the very beginning of this project, I actually I did start by wood because it was the most popular reference model for the in the High Qing period for making Trompe porcelain. So I also did start wondering why. So from my research, the first reason is it was the first piece commissioned by the imperial family, by the Yongzheng emperor. And that's why it became much popular in the imperial and non-imperial context. And the reason he chose wood is because a plain wood and a very simple material as such was an important, has important symbolism in the Chan Buddhism. So Chan Buddhism was also the belief that the Qing emperor, particularly the Yongzheng emperor, he himself practiced actively. So he chose that piece as the first to express his desire to pursue Trompe. I think is highly related for the religious purpose.
Thank you very much for clarifying that. Our following comment pertains to an earlier object cluster slide. So one of the slides at the beginning of your talk where you had many objects, there was a moon flask that reminded me of the blue and white porcelain one in the Gardiner collection. What was the flask in your earlier slide made of? I don't know if you remember this one.
Yeah, an earlier object cluster. Oh, that one. Oh, hold on. Let me see which one. should be the one.
You can pull up the PowerPoint if you
like.
like.
Let me pull up. I think it's the one look like bronze. Let me see. 1 second. Sorry. Wait a minute. Sorry. Should be. Oh, hold on. The cross. So that was yeah, one of the early. Sorry, bear with me. Yeah, I think it's this one, I believe. Yeah. So yeah, so this one is actually made of porcelain. Yeah, but it does look like bronze. So yeah, it was discovered in France, and when it was first show up in our market, this is me with my daughter. Yeah, and yeah, I just flew later right away because this piece was just very impressive, and it's very huge in a large scale compared to the other comparable. So yeah, it's very realistic, and it's made of porcelain with T-dust glaze to imitate the bronze, and also it's got some two-color glaze here and there spray over, and it's look like a patina, a green patina on copper. Yeah.
Thank you. So our following question: how did you know particular display spaces in the palace were coded or defined as feminine spaces. So can you explain how we come to this knowledge of knowing which ones are designated for women?
Okay. Yeah. So just in terms of the display space, there are several ways to know the original display place. So the first is all based on the primary textual source. So the first one is in the Paris Museum in Beijing, and also the Paris National Paris Museum in Taipei. When the Qing Empire collapsed, the Republic period, Republican government took over, and they slowly remove all the objects in the Forbidden City out of the Paris. And at that time, they have a document saying that which piece was removed from which palace. So all those data are still available to access in these two Paris museums. So that is the first thing, first resource you can look for. And the second one is called the display record. So throughout the Qing dynasty, from the High Qing, beginning of High Qing, all the way to the late Qing dynasty, that is late 19th century, early 20th century, they keep the records of display. So it's pretty much like an inventory checklist of what happened in each palace and what we have in this year. And they did that annually, probably 2 or 3 times a year, and consistently, and they keep that the record is all complete and survive to the present day. So that's the second source. And the number 3 is there is another source called the tribute record. So the tribute record is basically an inventory list of the tribute to the imperial court from different places, from the different province to the Beijing imperial court. And when they brought the tribute to the court, the emperor usually gave an order or commission saying that, oh, I want to keep this piece. I don't want that piece. And when he did want to keep this piece, he will say, I present this to my daughter's room or my mom's room, something like that. So that is another resource we can look for the original display record.
Great, thank you. I'll take another question. So were imperial kilns, especially for ceramics that were for the emperor and other high status members only, were they one-of-a-kind objects? And were there many similar pieces made?
Yeah, so yeah, very good question. Yeah, so for those in the very beginning, it was only for imperial member only, and by saying imperial member, not necessarily mean the emperor himself. So in the very beginning, Yongzheng Emperor was the one who commissioned the first piece, but later in the early Qianlong period, the Yongzheng Emperor's son. In the very beginning, as you sure, let me show this slide. Okay, here you go. So as you can see, in the very beginning, this is the Qianlong period. So in the very beginning, the emperor didn't really interested in making Trompe porcelain, but before that, his father, the Qianlong emperor's father, was really interested in Trompe porcelain. And later in his reign, the Qianlong emperor's reign, he picked up and he started to be interested in making Trompe porcelain. But in the Yongzheng period, the other imperial member, like the emperor's brother, were very interested in making Trompe porcelain. And because they are running the non-imperial kiln in the Jingdezhen, in the Jingdezhen area, so many porters in the Jingdezhen, they are making Trompe porcelain constantly throughout the 18th century. And that tradition also brought the momentum for the other kiln around Jingdezhen, for example, like near Canton, they also start to fire in Trompe porcelain. So it became a popular merchandise, so popular commodity for as one of the export porcelain pattern. So I would say it's actually not specific for the imperial family, and it was also popular in civilian kiln.
Thank you so much for clarifying that. So we're going to be ending our program now. Thank you so much, Dr. Chih-En Chen, for this wonderful lecture. And thank you to all of our audience for attending this lecture today, and also for all of your great questions. I would like to mention our next virtual lecture, which will be taking place on February 17th. At 1 p.m. It will be delivered by Dr. Natsu Oyobe and will focus on the Japanese tea ceremony. So you can visit our website for registration information. So I hope you'll join us in great numbers. So thank you so much once more, Dr. Chen. It was great to have you today. And thank you, everyone, for being here with us today. Have a great day. Bye.
Bye.